That's right. Ayabonga Cawe in the studio with us still. He's from the Young Economists of Africa, just discussing the equity and the employment bill. The fact of the matter is it created a big hoo-ha amongst political individuals and political parties. But how is the ordinary man meant to understand this, and why are these amendments creating all this noise? So those are some really important questions, because I'm not certain that everybody quite understood what the amendments meant and how they were going to set this equity bill, employment equity bill, apart from what we'd had previously.
I think you're correct when you say there's a big hoo-ha, because from a lot of quarters, I mean, it's clearly unjustified. So maybe just to backtrack a bit, the employment equity bill is aimed at sort of reproducing the racial demographics that we have in our society in the workplace. So in a sense, it's about making sure that workplace racial demographics reflect those of the society in general. And then in the bigger scheme of things, it's about democratizing the workplace. Now, some of the amendments that have come through are in the form of sort of more hectic sort of punitive measures for businesses that don't comply. So the cost of non-compliance are greater under the new amendment bill. And also the threshold for firms. So there's an annual sort of turnover threshold in order to designate some of the firms that would have to comply under this order. And in that regard, a lot of small businesses that initially had to comply under the previous legislation no longer have to, because there's been a 200% increase in the annual turnover threshold. So some of the sort of misgivings that a lot of people in the DA and some people in the Liberal camp have about the impact that this bill is going to have on small businesses seems to be a bit misplaced.
However, from what the explanation you've just given,
yes,
there were great benefits for the small business.
Yes.
Why did this have to become a racial issue of any kind?
So I think, I mean, if one accepts that we come from a history where there's been unequal access to economic power and inequality of access to income and wealth, which was racially determined, then you would have to have some kind of form of fair discrimination in order to address and to level out the playing field. The biggest problem that many people in the DA have is that it increases the regulatory burden on businesses. And it means that businesses, if you take the sort of more standard mainstream view, won't be able to invest as much as they would have if there wasn't the extra regulatory burden.
However, we understand that affirmative action and so on are there for a reason.
Yes.
And though the inequalities brought about in our society
Yes.
prior to these regulations
Yes.
have not yet been ironed out.
No, definitely not. So in as much as a lot of people have had access to the political system and the political system has been democratized in a sense, you haven't had the same situation happening with the economy and the workplace in general. So I think the affirmative action and in the form of the Employment Equity Amendment Bill represents a paradigm shift, and it represents a serious sort of intensity on the part of lawmakers to say, look, if you are not willing to comply as a business with redressing and sort of achieving serious racial transformation as it relates to the economy, then you're either going to be punished for it or you're going to be given the negative incentive to begin to comply.
So in your mind, or in the mind of your organization, as
Yes.
young economists, the emerging economists
Yes.
who are going to predict our future financially, I like you, so I'm not so worried about what you might do in the future. The fact of the matter is that these amendments were necessary at this time.
I think what we've had since the first bill came out in about 1995, following on from the Labour Relations Act, is you've had a lot of businesses who have either not complied at all or who have had what is called malicious compliance. So who've complied just for the sake of complying and seen
Right.
it as a tick box exercise. On the other hand, you've also had a lot of fronting. So where in terms of the employment equity, there has to be racial representativity at all levels of the company.
Yeah.
You've had a lot of people being brought in, particularly at the upper echelons of a lot of businesses, who are there as just rubber stamping some of the decisions and are not necessarily there when the decisions are made.
Well, I think what has changed, I don't know if you'll agree with me, is that people are beginning to realize the profitability of in fact complying in the and properly complying and bringing people in legitimately as they should. And as they've seen the legitimacy and the profitability of it, things have changed.
So I think one of the things that hasn't come out of this discussion, because what it has sort of been reduced to in a lot of instances, is petty politicking. And what businesses don't realize is that they stand a lot to benefit by actually transforming their workplaces in terms of some of the contracts that they can get from government's procurement spend, and also some of the benefits that they can get by following the BEE codes of good practice that are set out by the Department of Trade and Industry. Because that would then set them up to benefit from some of the incentives and some of the support provided by ministries like the Department of Trade and Industry. Instead of then taking an approach that says they don't want to necessarily have the system where racial quotas are imposed, I think business needs to understand that it's a societal imperative to begin to address the question of transformation. And you're not going to build the South African domestic market and expand that market and have a fledgling sort of burgeoning economy if you don't make sure that there's access to the economy for more people.
And what I think most of us would like business to know and society to know is we don't necessarily want to have these either. We would have loved to have had an equal playing field to begin with. A rosy past. We didn't have a rosy past. And pretty soon we won't have to discuss these issues as more of your generation, for example, begin to take on their rightful role.
I think what business needs to clearly understand in this country is that insofar as a lot of businesses have benefited in the past from government policy, in the form of influx control, cheap labor and the like. It's time now in the new South Africa for them to be part of this effort of building a new country and for them to be part of this transformation effort in our country. So you have a lot of companies who still want to conduct business as if we're still in the bad old days of apartheid. And what we need to then begin to do in this country is to make sure that you create more opportunities for people across the board. For us, I mean, the bone of contention from the side of the Young Economists for Africa is to say, does this amendment bill really represent a paradigm shift in how BEE has been applied in practice? Because it's all good and well to say, look, the legislation looks good in terms of what it makes provision for, but what we've seen is that the track record of BEE over the past 20 years or so has been one where a small sort of grouping within the ruling coalition within the ANC has been benefiting from BEE. And it hasn't been as broad-based as many would like. So I think that criticism from the Democratic Alliance towards the ANC and other lawmakers who have passed this bill is warranted.
Do you really think it's warranted? Because, I mean, the fact is that from where I sit, yes, there are huge discrepancies between the haves and the have-nots in South Africa, and it does look as though the crevice is widening, but it's also, we have to put in statistics, the growth of our economy, the growth of our society, and so on. But I do see that there are more benefits and more income bases for more people in South Africa.
Definitely. But I think it's not as broad as we would have liked. So it's not correct 20 years after democracy to only have what someone like Zwelinzima Vavi calls the cappuccino economy, where you have, you know, the entire economy sort of ruled by this sort of white males, and then you have a sprinkling of chocolate at the top of the cappuccino. Yes. And I think that for us is the biggest problem, that a lot of people haven't been able to be integrated and into the economy, and this legislation can only be successful on the basis that it trains people who can adequately fill those posts.
All right, well, there we have it. Ayabonga, Cawe, always a pleasure to have you in the studio with us from the Young Economists for Africa organization, breaking down in I think, more realistic terms, the Employment Equity Act here on ANN7's Vuka Africa.